if your kid's going to go play basketball, you're not going to buy them a pair of dollar store flip-flops and say, well, once you get good at this, then I'll buy you some real basketball shoes.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the great fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I really appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now, on to my next guest, Wendy Higdon. Hi, Wendy.
Hey, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to have you on the show. I've had a lot of middle school band directors in the last year because I'm teaching younger kids again. And so, I've been sort of spacing you guys out a little bit.
We are a unique breed.
All right, Wendy, can you tell everybody about your background? How did you get your start in music?
Wow, that's such a long time ago. I think I probably always knew that I was going to play an instrument. My dad played trombone in high school, and my mom had a Wurlitzer organ in our house that she played not well. She was kind of self-taught, but she enjoyed it. And I had several older cousins who all played piano, and so when the time came to join band, something that I wanted to do, I never gave it a second thought. And so I started playing clarinet in 7th grade, and the rest is history, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. And so what was that experience like? Do you remember your early teachers and how that came about?
I do. I have had some really great middle school and high school teachers. My middle school band director, her name was Sue Finger, and she was tough. She demanded a lot from us, but I think, especially later on as I was making the decision to enter the field and become a music educator, she was a really strong female role model for me. And, this is back in the days where you didn't see a lot of female band directors. It was pretty much an old boys club. And so that was, I think that was a real positive thing to have that female role model to look up to.
Yeah, we can certainly talk more about that later in the episode because I think that's a theme that we're finally starting to see that change a little bit gradually or maybe more rapidly in recent years. But
yeah,
that diversity on the podium especially.
Oh, absolutely.
So when did you? So you always knew you were going to play in the band, but when did you decide that you were going to have a career as a musician?
Early in high school, probably 10th grade. My dad especially was very keen on me figuring out early in my high school career what it was that I wanted to do. He is a planner and very much a type A personality. He's retired now, but he was an engineer, so you can kind of imagine how an engineer's brain works. And so it was really important to him that we map out my high school schedule all 4 years, and could really only map out that schedule if I knew what direction I wanted to go career-wise. And so he was very, very, very keen on me making that decision. And I was a good student. I had a lot of options open to me, but music was the thing that I loved, and it was something that really challenged me. And I think that I think that's important. I think you don't want to be in a career where you're bored. Um, and so I think that was part of the decision too.
If I can make an observation, you've got your father's quality for organization. Your website is terrific.
Oh, thanks so
It's
much.
so chock full of wonderful things that any band director can use. And so I think that you got a little bit of that from your dad, maybe. I'm just presuming, maybe too much, but yeah.
Not his math skills, though. I don't know that.
Yeah. So were you going to be a performance major or a teacher? Did you know for sure?
Yeah, I wanted to go into education.
So, Wendy, when you talk about your high school band and that experience there, is there anything from the teachers that you had then, any experiences or any teaching techniques that you still carry with you and use in your band room today?
There's a lot of, well, let me back up just a little bit.
Sure.
My high school was pretty unique. We were the Highland Scots, and so we wore full Scottish uniforms, we wore kilts, we had bagpipes, and, so I've always carried a lot of pride, as do a lot of the alumni from that school, of that Scottish tradition. And the high school actually closed about 10 years ago, uh, declining population in my hometown. And they went from 3 high schools when I was a student, and now they're down to 1. And so I think, in some ways that makes me a little more nostalgic for, those experiences, and that just because it was so unique. So there's that piece. As far as the teaching technique, um, I think that when I first started in the profession, I really tried to emulate what I had seen from my middle school band director, and approach things much in the same way that she did. As I have grown as an educator and experienced things and experienced life, been a parent, and just experience life in general, I think I've changed quite a bit. My teaching style has evolved quite a bit. I'm much more student focused now than I was in the beginning. Um, when I first started teaching, uh, it was about building programs and this um, constantly striving for a well managed, disciplined classroom and excellence. And I've just softened in my old age a little bit, and really tried to be bring in a lot more of the social and emotional piece to it. Um, and I think that's made me a better teacher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I can connect with the kids more. Just starting out, that wasn't something that I had really experienced or been taught.
Mm-hmm.
But we know so much more about what kids need these days, and I think kids need um, what kids need today is quite a bit different than what kids needed 20 years ago.
I'd agree with that. I had a pretty bad middle school band experience at the first middle school I was at. And I actually quit band when I was a 7th grader and didn't play.
Yeah.
And then I went to a different school and rejoined. And so, I don't know. It's just an interesting thing to talk about what that when you go into an environment and how kids are affected by the way things are structured.
Yeah, and I do think structure is very important. I would never say my classroom is loose. I don't think it is. I mean, we have a lot of structure built in, and we have high expectations, but there's also a more kinder, gentler human
Mm-hmm.
element.
Yeah, there has to be.
And and kids today are struggling in so many ways with anxiety and depression and mental health issues and sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And not that not that they didn't 20 years ago, but it's so much more evident and pronounced.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because society has changed, because the environment in which kids live their lives has has changed, that we have to adapt as educators as well.
Wendy, where did you grow up? I don't think we mentioned that.
I grew up in Anderson, Indiana, which is about 45 minutes northeast of Indianapolis, and I've been a Central Indiana girl my whole life.
Where'd you go to school for college?
Undergraduate was at Ball State University,
Mm-hmm.
and then I got my master's degrees. I have two masters from Butler University in Indiana.
Oh, okay. Such great schools in Indiana as far as music
Yeah,
education.
I I had really great college experiences.
Wendy, we should probably get into some of the nuts and bolts of being a middle school teacher and what has made you successful. And we were just talking about structure. And can you talk about some of the structures and procedures that set your program up for success?
Well, I think the key word there is procedures. And it's really important. You can't assume, especially especially with middle schoolers or beginners, wherever you start. I start my beginners in middle school. We have a sixth grade start. So they come to me with zero experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything from how you enter the room to where your instrument cases go to how you manage your instrument locker to where, what your binder looks like, where music stands go, how the chairs are lined up. You have to teach all of that. And so generally, I don't assume anything. And when the kids come back as seventh and eighth graders, we do spend some time, just kind of reviewing those things just to make sure. Um, and it's not, I don't want to spend a whole week just reviewing procedures, but
Mm-hmm.
we're um, constantly reinforcing the proper way to do things, how we want to do things. And I think the other part is that's important to that, especially for today's young person, is to understand why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, you know, it's not. It's just not. I'm not just have some kind of whim and because I just feel like it, you have to put your case in this location. We talk about the reasons why we have certain things done in a certain way, and I think that helps students to understand the importance of those procedures.
That's really interesting that you want to provide that why. And of course, we know that having that gives them some ownership over it.
Sure.
So are there any things that maybe you might do different than other directors that you know?
I don't typically do things the way everybody else does them. I tend to be a little quirky in that regard, but I always have a reason for it. Um, I also don't. That doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me that I might approach things a little bit differently than someone else,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't feel a need to impose the way I do things on other people as well.
Mm-hmm. I
If that makes sense. I'm kind of swirling around this topic a little bit, but yeah, I just think I tend to be a little quirky in how I do things. Not, I'm not way out in left field, but I just tend to approach things from a little bit different point of view, maybe.
I think there's a lesson there for young teachers though, because we have to be ourselves. We can't try to be someone else.
Absolutely. And when I work with student teachers, and I talk about, and I'm modeling how we do procedures and all that, and I will share the why with a student teacher as well, and I'll tell them, as you get your own program, you're going to have to make these decisions as to what's important to you and um, how you want to approach things, but always have a reason for why you're doing something the way you're doing it.
So what are some of your best practices for recruiting students and retaining students?
It's all about communication and getting the word out.
Mm-hmm.
Because if people don't know about your program, if they don't know how to join, they don't know the process to join, they don't know the benefits of joining, you're going to miss out on a lot of people. Um, my recruitment, kind of my backstory and how my recruitment process came to be is a little interesting. And when I share it with people, often they're kind of shocked, actually. When I was a young teacher, recruitment's always been important to me. I've always been um, felt very, very honored to be able to be that person that stands at the door to the band room and invites in a new group of students each year. I value that. Um, I, I feel like that's one of the most important things that we do. And, in my earlier years of my career, I did the same things that every band director in the country does. You do a little concert, you talk up the program, you send a letter home, all of those basic things. Maybe visit the classrooms and talk to the kids and drum up excitement. Um, and that was my recruitment process. But about 10 or 12 years ago, we were in the midst of the high stakes testing push, and our administration at the school made the decision, and it was a district wide decision. You're not doing your recruitment concert anymore. It's a disruption to instructional time, and we were not singled out. I don't want it to sound like we were singled out. At that point in time, there were lots of things that went away. Anything that wasn't part of the curriculum kind of went away. Field trips were gone. Special programs were gone. There was this um, push to maximize every minute of instructional time. And so when this happened and they said, you're not going to visit the classrooms anymore, you're not going to be able to have the kids come to a concert to show off the music program, I was devastated. I just could not even imagine how I was going to get kids excited about being in the band program if I couldn't even talk to them. And, after that initial shock wore off, I realized I was going to have to figure this out um, because my program depended on it. My job depended on it. This was something I was going to have to work through. And so I did a lot of talking to colleagues. I called everybody I knew to ask about what they did for recruitment. I researched some best practices. I even studied some marketing techniques. And over the years, I've honed this system. The good news is that our numbers didn't drop just because we couldn't actively recruit kids. In fact, today we have about 300 more students in the band orchestra choir program at my school than we did back when we were doing the concerts and visiting the classrooms.
So I had asked you, or I had mentioned earlier that I'm sort of rewriting my band handbook for my school. And one of the things I'm struggling with is I'm trying to rethink the way I'm assessing my students. And so you talk about students practicing the day before. What sort of assessment techniques do you use to keep the kids, your middle school kids, moving forward?
Well, of course, you're always doing formative assessment. That's happening continually. And what I try to, in terms of formative assessment, I try to keep the feedback loop really, really short. So, I think we say too much.
Can you give me an example?
If the kids play something, I'll give them one thing to fix. I don't give them 5 things. I give them one thing. So let's make sure we're taking a 2-count breath. Then they do it again immediately. Or let's see if we can use the very tip of our tongue. Just one piece of information. And I generally try to, when possible, make that information that I'm providing not just a what, but a how.
Yeah, I think that's really crucial.
Yeah. So that's for the formative assessment. That feedback is quick, and then we play it again. In terms of actual formal assessment, I use kind of a hybrid rubric. I don't like using just a straight rubric because it's weird. Rubrics are just a little weird. But I like the idea of being able to show kids different levels of achievement. So I might use, for example, and here I haven't looked at one since it's summer. I haven't looked at one since the spring. But if I have on the rubric, say a category about articulation, 5 points might be the student performed all articulations correctly and did not slur or tongue any extra notes. And 4 points, you would go down and you would prescribe for each category what that looks like. But the other thing that I do is I always put a screenshot of the music on the top of the rubric, and then I will circle any notes and rhythms that they misplayed, so that they can see right on the music where any mistakes occurred. I'll mark any articulations that are missed. It's a real good visual for kids to actually be able to pinpoint where those errors are, instead of just having a rubric that's a little vague. I missed some dynamics, but which ones did I miss? I played 4 wrong notes, but which ones were they?
Yeah, I always found when I was teaching sight singing, especially as a college professor, I always found that my rubrics depressed the grades too much.
Yes,
like
absolutely.
they forced me to make judgments that were too broad. When there's a bigger picture, because, a student may be struggling with one aspect of hearing and singing, but there might be other things that they're doing very well. The rhythm might be spot on.
Right.
But that rubric may not account for that. It's very hard to write a good rubric that accounts for all those things in performance.
It is. And so when I do a playing test, and I make the assessment form, the actual rubric part of it is generally only worth about half of the total points. And then the other half comes from notes and rhythms, that kind of thing.
So now, do you do that assessment once a week, twice a week, or once every 2 weeks? What's your plan for that?
It kind of depends on the class and the time of year and the number of students in the class.
Mm-hmm.
I had a beginning class last year that had 51 beginners in it, and I saw them for 45 minutes. It's really hard to assess individually when you have less than a minute per kid.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that I did is for that particular class, is I would assess much shorter excerpts. Instead of doing 8 or 16 bars, I might do 2 or 4 bars.
Mm-hmm.
I also use smart music, and so we're able to use that for some assessment pieces. And then one of the things that I've started to do a little bit more, our school district has adopted a learning management system. We use Canvas.
Mm-hmm.
So I use some assignments on Canvas where the kids will submit a video, and I'll do some assessment that way.
Yeah, I teach an online music appreciation course through Canvas.
It's
well versed in that software.
I don't love Canvas. There's a lot of cool things that you can do, but it's clunky, and so I don't like to do that a lot. But for things that can be assessed by video, I will do that.
Yeah, I think I think I only see my kids, especially my middle school. I only see them 40 minutes twice a week, so I get basically an hour and a half with them. Yeah, and so I don't really want to use any of that time. Okay. So I think I'm going to have them submit videos to a Google Drive account.
Yeah.
And then just assess them that way, and then I can talk to them. I can send some comments back that way. Yeah. I think I need to maximize my time in the classroom.
I would do the same thing if I were in your position.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's tricky. Yeah. The 2-day-a-week thing is tricky, especially with the fourth graders. Basically, I treat fourth and fifth grade as the first year of band. Mm-hmm. So I go halfway through the method book in fourth grade, and then my fifth graders are going to start back at, the first part, and we're going to go through that whole first half again really quickly, and then we're going to go through the second half. But I don't start the beginners in the method book until October anyway, so it's not like, it's not like we're going super fast.
Right, exactly. And I don't think you should go particularly fast with beginners. I really kind of, and I will tell students this, it's my goal that everybody is successful. And, I provide opportunities and I encourage students to move faster on their own. I'll say to kids, if you guys are totally rocking exercise 17, then go ahead and look at the next page. And we talked a little bit about, before we started recording the podcast, a little bit about band karate. And so I'll use band karate as a way to let kids work at their own pace. I think it is important for those high achieving students to have opportunities to move faster. But it's so important to make sure that kids, especially in the beginning couple of years of instruction, that they're not developing bad habits.
Absolutely. I'm going to not make the assumption that all my listeners know what band karate is. So can you talk about how you use that?
Band karate is, I think it started off as recorder karate. And the way I use it is I have the different belts. So the white belt is the easiest, and then the yellow belt, and it proceeds all the way through the black belt. And what I have done is chosen songs of increasing difficulty that the kids have to master and perform in order to earn that belt. And I do all the band karate through Smart Music, so it doesn't take up my class time. And it's not all students will go for it, but it's a great way for kids to move at their own pace and to get some recognition. Every Friday we do our belt award ceremony, and we pull up a YouTube video of celebration, and the kids clap, and we announce the belts, and they get a little sticker to put on their binder of the color of the belt that they've earned, and we have posters in the hallway that they can sign. And with your black belt, you get to hit the gong.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so we try to make it fun, and we do that each Friday where we're recognizing those kids that have earned a belt.
Oh, that's an awesome way to do it. I'm going to write this down.
I bet you'll hear this again.
Now let me ask, do you don't use that in any sort of assessment? That's an external or an extrinsic motivation separate from the grading.
Yeah, it is completely separate from the grading.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I don't think that should be tied to that, because then you're sort of, if you do that, then you're sort of setting yourself up to have them advance at a certain rate so that they can be assessed, which doesn't seem to be the spirit of what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
And and I do. I have kids that choose to do none of it.
Yeah. Sure. What method book do you use?
We use Accent on Achievement for our beginners, and I like it. I've used it for a lot of years, but I pull in a lot of supplementary material. The material that I'm really excited about right now, and I did use them last year, but I'm still trying to figure out how to make them work. It's the musical mastery for band that was written by several of the Texas band directors, and I love what they've done. Chris Meredith and Alicia DeSoto and some of their colleagues. It is just an amazing piece of work that they have put together. The pedagogy is solid. It's great. The challenge for me is that I don't have like instrument classes, and they are set up to be taught in like instrument classes. And so I've had to be pretty creative in pulling in that material. I'm really excited because I guess they have a supplementary pack that's going to come out this fall. That's for I think it's going to have flute, oboe, and bassoon, if I'm understanding correctly. I don't want to misspeak, but flute, oboe, and bassoon with common pages. So if those instruments are taught together, it's a little bit easier. but I love that it really focuses on the pedagogy piece. Now there's no tunes in it. It's not meant to stand alone. But there's great material there.
So now I have an interesting situation in my school. I teach, one day I have pullouts with homogeneous groups, so I can put my woodwinds together, my brass together, my percussion together. And then the other day I have a heterogeneous class. And so I do both in the course of a week. So you mentioned that you do heterogeneous only?
Yes. But it is pared down a little bit. So I have a colleague that I work with. Andrew Bruff is my co-director here at Creekside Middle, and he takes the brass and percussion. I take the woodwinds.
I see.
So we're divided that way. And then for our beginners, we have 2 periods. So this coming year, I'll have a class that's flute, oboe, bassoon, and I'll have a separate class that's clarinet, saxophone.
Oh, that's actually pretty good.
Yeah, it is really pretty good. And he does the same thing with the brass. He has a trumpet French horn class, and then he has a low brass.
Interesting that he wouldn't put the percussion separately. That's one of the great challenges for me, is to keep them on track. I just pull them out separately.
Well, we don't have a period in the day to do that.
Mm-hmm.
When we moved to this new block schedule 4 years ago, we lost that ability to have a separate percussion class.
Mm-hmm.
But in the meantime, we do have a young lady who comes in, and we bring her in twice a week to pull out the percussion.
Oh yeah, that really helps.
And we have to pay her out of our budget. She's not a district employee yet. We're hoping, fingers crossed, but we just make that investment so that those kids have twice a week have dedicated percussion time, because it is hard.
It is hard. Well, if that twice a week, he at least gets them set up for the other 3 days so that they know what's going on. You're not constantly having them in the front, Yeah.
And it's better for the low brass as well, because, let's face it, trombone's not easy. We start beginners on tuba, and that's not easy.
Right. Well, it's the hardest group of the winds to start, for sure, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've made that conscious choice to put all my brass together, and my sections shift over the course of the year. Like, depending on what we're doing and where we are in the books, I may move kids around. Like, I may put the saxophones with the trumpets at one point.
I don't have that flexibility, but the fact that I can narrow down my classes enough that I have just a couple of instruments.
Yeah.
A lot of times what I'll do, and I did this a lot with the musical mastery books this last year, just figuring out how to use them. If there was an exercise that I needed the clarinets to learn, I wrote it out for the other instruments that were in that class, so that I still got the benefit, but the other kids weren't just sitting there with nothing to do.
Mm-hmm. We talked about musical mastery. Are there any other supplemental materials that you use?
I love the essential musicianship books. They are kind of the foundation of our band program here in Carmel, 6 through 12. And so now, I don't know if you're familiar with those or not, or if the listeners are familiar with them. The Essential Musicianship book is an ensemble fundamental skill book. So it's not your typical method book. It doesn't have songs in it. It really is working on things like listening and playing together, breathing together, releasing together, different articulation styles. As you get into the more advanced books, there's exercises that will help you to work on some of the just intonation, tuning thirds, fourths, fifths. There's a lot in those books, but it takes a little bit of thought as to, you have to have some understanding. When I first saw the books, I thought, oh, well, okay, these are good, and our high school had started to use them, but I don't think I personally really understood the power behind those exercises. And then when Mary Ellen Cabot came out with her book, The Notes from Eddie Green on Teaching Band, and I read that, all of a sudden it was like a light bulb turned on for me, and I better understood the power of those exercises. And the power is that they're beautifully simplistic. The exercises are able to be played perfectly. And so it's that striving for perfection, perfection in entrances, perfection in releases, perfection in a staccato articulation, because the exercises are so simple. But if you just play through them on autopilot, they don't really do anything.
How about music in your program? Do you have much experience having composers in?
We've had a few in. Of course, Richard Saucedo was our high school band director for many, many years. And so, of course, we've had Richard come in and work with the kids. Now that he's retired, and he's so busy, he's just so in demand all over the world, really. But we love to have Richard come in whenever he's available. Michael Sweeney's been in to work with my kids. In fact, interesting, when we performed at Midwest in 2013, we were doing one of Mike's pieces. It's called The Last Full Measure, and it's a Civil War kind of medley. And so Hal Leonard does all of their recording sessions for all of their band pieces here in Indianapolis. In fact, it's literally their recording studio is literally about 3 or 4 miles from my school. And so he was in town to do some recording sessions, and we had him come out and work with the kids. The piece has a part for penny whistle. And Mike loves Irish music. He's like an aficionado of Irish music. And so he brought his penny whistle collection, and he worked with my flute players that were going to do the penny whistle part and gave them all kinds of advice. And it was really cool. And then he played with us on the concert at Midwest. So he had a Civil War musician's uniform that he got a hold of somehow. And so he wore the Civil War musician's uniform and had his penny whistle, and he came out when the part of the piece came up, and stood there with my 3 flute players that were playing penny whistle, and they all played together. It was so fun.
How about music? One of the things I talked a lot about with Rachel Maxwell was her programming. She's so into music.
She's so good at picking music.
I know, but she mentioned that she lives out of the Queenwood set their first year.
Yeah, I certainly have some of my go-to pieces in the first year. First concert, I always do Paul Lavender's Beethoven's Ninth. But I tend to get bored. So I'm always looking for something new to do. And in order to find those gems, it's a lot of work. There's so much that's published each year, and some of it's pretty good, and some of it's kind of not good, and a few things are really, have potential, and especially at the young band level. So I'm always on the search for great pieces, and if a colleague recommends a piece to me, I always want to check it out, and that saves me a little legwork if I can get good recommendations from colleagues that I like Rachel that I know have great taste in music.
Wendy, this has been a really great conversation. We've been going for quite a while, and I still have my final questions I ask all my guests.
Okay, well, let's do it.
Okay, and so the first of these questions is, where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
I try never to even get close to the line, to be honest. I think that it is so easy to make competition unhealthy, and I just don't want to go there. I like to look at competition in terms of we're competing with ourselves to be better, not we're competing with one another. In fact, we take our 8th graders to the music in the parks like every other middle school band does, and in the country just about. And we go ratings only. There's just no desire for me to, to do that competition piece where we're ranking bands against each other. Um, that is just not important. Um, I think that we really talk about what can we do to be better than we were yesterday, and how can we strive for excellence in what we do. And if we do all of those things, then we're probably going to sound pretty good. If, and we do, our state ISMA, Indiana State School Music Association, has an organizational festival each spring that we go to, and you get rated gold, silver, bronze. Um, and I tell my students, I say, look, the score and the rating don't really matter. What matters to me is if we can all walk off that stage at the end of the performance and feel proud of what we did. It's so easy to get wrapped up in competition, and it can really be unhealthy. It really can be unhealthy. One of the things that I really love about our high school program, I mean, obviously competition is a part of that marching band program. Carmel High School does very well competitively with their marching band, but the directors never talk about winning. They never talk about beating another school. It really is, and my kids went through the Carmel High School program. The focus is on, let's do things at the best level, the highest level that we can do, and everything else will take care of itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because not everyone's as fortunate to be in a Carmel.
And that is something that our students, particularly at the high school, but we talk about it here too at Creekside, they're reminded of frequently that, just by the nature of where their parents chose to live, they have this opportunity that thousands of other students would, just go nuts to have the opportunity to do. And it's very, very easy, I think, to lose sight of how fortunate we are to live in a community that values education, that values the arts, that that has a lot of successes, because we know that success breeds success. And a community that has attracted really fine teachers to come in and teach their music programs. And we do remind our students how fortunate they are and how lucky they are, and that they shouldn't take that for granted. Now, that's hard for a 12 or 13 or 14-year-old to relate to, but it's something that's important for them to hear.
Yeah, well, you keep telling them, eventually they'll get it.
Well, and when we visit, when we do the music in the parks and we visit schools and they see the facilities, maybe the facility's not quite as nice as what they have at home, or the equipment's not quite as nice. I think it kind of brings back those conversations that we have about, and it's always approached positively. It's never approached to look down on someone else. We don't do that at all. It really is, look how fortunate you are to be where you are.
Wendy, you mentioned earlier that you've been teaching for a long time. How have you managed to find work-life balance in your career as a music educator?
Well, that's something I'm not always real good at. I have to work hard to leave work at work, and I think I've gotten a lot better at that later in my career. Early in my career, I would bring a lot of work home. I would work a lot of weekends. I would, constantly be thinking about and doing band. And the older that I've gotten, I realize that there are some things that don't have to happen today. I can get to that tomorrow. And, particularly in terms of, maybe responding to an email or cleaning off my desk. Sometimes you just have to let something go for a few hours, just so that you don't get burnout, you don't drive yourself crazy, so that you do have some downtime and some relaxed time. It's hard. It's very hard for me.
All right, Wendy, this is a big question, and my guests tend to choose how they want to answer it according to how they, their perspective in the band community. And it's, what are the challenges facing music education, and how can we best meet them?
There's so many things that are popping in my head right now. Interestingly, my youngest son will be a senior music education major at Butler University this year, and so I'm kind of able to see. It's been so cool to be able to talk shop with my kid. It's been really, really neat. But to see him at the very beginning of his career, and here I am, quite a ways down that path, and the challenges that he's going to face, and how different things are. I think that education in general is facing challenges throughout the country. We've I wonder where that tipping point is. Educators have been demonized. We've been the scapegoats for all of the problems. The financial support for schools in general, not just music programs, but schools in general, is way, way down. We're seeing tremendous shortages in some parts of the country in terms of teachers, some subject areas in terms of teachers. And, as music educators, we're not immune to those challenges. And I think that I know that the music educators that I know, when we're faced with a problem, we figure out another way to make it work. That's what I've always done. Can't do this? All right, I'm going to find another way to provide that experience for my kids. And I think a lot of teachers do that. And what is happening is it's creating this vicious circle. You hear about teachers and they spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on supplies for their classroom, and they just make it work. And so I think that at some point we're going to hit a tipping point where something has to change, and I think that we're getting closer and closer to that. As music educators, we have to help our young colleagues not only understand the subject matter, understand the content, but they have to be prepared to do so many other things. They have to be advocates. They have to understand budgeting and finance. They have to understand mental health issues, and they have to understand all of these challenges that I didn't face, almost 30 years ago when I entered the classroom and didn't even have a computer on my desk, because you didn't have computers in classrooms, and teachers didn't have computers. The landscape is very, very different, and I think those of us that have been around have to. I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, Mark. I'm kind of swirling around it, but we have a responsibility to be a support system for those young people, and they have a responsibility to reach out and say, can you mentor me, or I need help, or I don't understand. And I do think that climate has changed. I know I felt when I first started teaching that I was expected to know it all, and asking questions was a sign of weakness. Now I know better than that now, but that was kind of drilled into us. as music education students is that, we have to be completely and totally prepared when we take that first job. And, we all need to do a better job of supporting one another.
Yeah. One of my former students, college students, just today, she's a second-year teacher going into her second year and she posted one of those memes on Facebook that shows like the publicly funded classroom that's just desks and empty walls, and then the teacher-funded classroom that's filled with, colors and posters, and it just breaks my heart to see that a young person who's just starting her career believes that that's the truth.
Yeah.
And
in a lot of places, it is the truth.
Yeah, I know. And that's really sad because, well, we know teachers aren't getting paid the highest wages in the country, and to have people reaching into their pockets to teach.
Right.
It's just, it boggles my mind, but I guess I'm a different generation.
And that's one of the things about my son going into this field. When he was first starting to talk about it, he and I had some conversations about, well, are you sure that this is what you want to do? And there's going to be challenges, and there's going to be hardships, and it's going to be a difficult journey, and teaching is not an easy profession. And he looked at me and said, Mom, I've been watching you do this for my whole life. I know what the challenges are. I've seen you deal with those my whole life. And I'm going into this with my eyes open, and this is what I have to do. This is what I want to do. And that allowed me to feel a lot better about him pursuing that path. In fact, not just a lot better. I'm so proud of him. But I do feel like a lot of our young people, they don't know. They don't see the challenges. They just know that they were in band and what it did for them personally, and they don't understand what goes on behind the scenes to make that work. And 4 years of undergraduate there's not enough time to learn everything you need to know. There's not enough time to learn even the pedagogy that you need to know. And so, our young teachers have to be prepared to continue learning once they get out into the classroom. And I'm fortunate. In Carmel schools, there are 10 of us that teach band in this district. We have we have one high school and 3 middle schools, and there's 10 band directors. But there are a lot of places where someone will take a job and they're the only music teacher K-12, and they don't have that support system right there to help them. Now, communication is a lot easier with the internet than it used to be, but you still have to reach out, and that can be hard.
Wendy, if I could give you a time machine and you could take it back to your high school graduation, what advice would you give yourself?
Well, I would have practiced a lot more.
That's my number one answer, by the way. It's the number one answer.
I would also have probably not taken myself so seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Just knowing what I know now, I probably would have approached my entire undergraduate education differently. Because you don't know what you don't know. And when you haven't done this job, you don't know what you need to know.
If you had a choice, what would be the final work for wind ensemble or band that you would conduct, and why?
Well, as a middle school director, I never get to do those pieces that made me fall in love with band literature.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really a fan of all the the British stuff, the whole suites, and the Grainger stuff, and all the folk song type pieces. So I'm sure it would be one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Those classic masterworks for band that basically started me down this path, made me fall in love with band music.
Yeah. My piece, The piece I would conduct last is actually William Walton's Crown Imperial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I think Irish Tune was the first band piece I fell in love with playing.
I'm lucky that, because I still do play clarinet. So every so often I'll get to play them.
Do you play in a community band or one of the local bands?
I play in the Kokomo Park Band,
Mm-hmm.
and Kokomo is a town about 45 minutes north of Carmel, and they have a summer concert series that they do. They have a Tuesday night rehearsal and a Wednesday night concert every week all summer, and it's new music each week and free concerts in the park. It's one of the oldest continuously running community bands in the country.
So I usually ask, is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote? But I realized I didn't really talk about your website and your blog with all the stuff it has. So can we take just a quick second to talk about On and Off the Podium?
Yeah, so On and Off the Podium is my website, onandoffthepodium.com. And there's a lot of different resources there, everything from articles that I've written to resources that I use in my classroom to I've got some presentations that I've done at different conferences. I made a stab at doing a podcast, but I got 2 episodes in and I realized how much work it was. I haven't done any since then, but those links are on there. It's just a variety of things, and everything on the website is available for any teacher to use if they want. I don't charge for any of the materials on my website. It's just a way for me to kind of give back to this profession that's given me so much.
Wendy, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, if they go to the website, there's a contact form on there, and they can reach out to me that way, or they can send me an email. So my email address is Wendy Higdon at me.com, and they can reach out to me that way.
Excellent. Wendy, thank you so much for your time.
You are so welcome. I had a great time talking with you.